The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is intensifying. Hamas militants have been launching hundreds of rockets into Israel, and Israeli forces have been responding with devastating airstrikes on Gaza. The escalating tensions are also spilling over into street violence in several Israeli cities, home to both Arabs and Jews.
This Arab man was pulled from his car and beaten by right-wing Israeli nationalists. It's the first act of nationalist violence to receive direct condemnation from the Prime Minister.
Nothing justifies the lynching of Arabs by Jews or the lynching of Jews by Arabs. It's unacceptable. We will not tolerate this. This violence is not us.
The conflict can be seen etched across the skyline. Hamas unleashed a stream of rocket fire towards Israel in retaliation for the destruction of a building in Gaza by Israel. These are the most intense hostilities that the country has seen in 7 years. It is particularly bad in mixed Jewish-Arab towns, with relentless rocket fire and rioting. The Palestinians' message to Israel and the Jewish settlers is loud and clear.
I address my words specifically to America and to Israel. Enough is enough. Leave us. We will remain thorns in your eyes. We will not leave our homeland. We will not leave our country.
The US maintained its support for Israel in its call for peace on Wednesday.
My expectation and hope is that this will be closing down sooner than later. But Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory.
Israel's defense was to target the Hamas militants. They say many senior commanders have been killed. But the attacks have also claimed the lives of Palestinian civilians. Neither side is showing any sign of backing down, prompting the United Nations to warn of full-scale civil war.
We'll speak now to Lynn Hastings. She's Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and United Nations Resident Coordinator for the Occupied Palestinian Territory. She joins us from Jerusalem. Thanks for being with us, Ms. Hastings. First of all, give us your assessment of the situation there right now.
Thanks, Terry. Generally speaking, I think most of the videos have spoken for that very question, but the situation is very alarming. And I use that word purposefully because it is something that the world needs to be paying attention to finally, that the situation here is going in the wrong direction. This latest escalation shows the depth of the problems between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Your office at the UN has warned that this conflict could turn into all-out war. What would that look like?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, the situation right now, some could call it to be all-out war. What we are concerned about, in addition to the situation in Gaza, is the spillover, as your reporter has described, into Israel. We're seeing clashes all over Israel, and we are concerned about the regional impact as well.
What are you and your other colleagues at the UN doing to stop this fighting? Because many people do look to the UN to broker a peace.
Sure, of course. Just first and foremost, in terms of what the UN is doing, we are, of course, continuing to provide humanitarian assistance on the ground. And while some people don't see this as connected to the political situation, it is very much needed to ensure that people's needs are met in these times. So, for example, fuel is no longer going into Gaza, which means hospitals, water and sanitation plants, and access to water itself will be severely limited when the fuel runs out on Sunday. So that's one thing that we're doing. We're responding to try and save lives as this conflict goes on. The second thing, of course, is that the United Nations has a mandate to try and broker peace. The special coordinator himself has been working relentlessly with the various interlocutors here on the ground, the parties, others regionally, and of course other member states of the Security Council and the Quartet for the Middle East peace process. This may not sound like a lot to a lot of your viewers, but this is what will bring the escalation down, and we need to focus on these types of efforts, the humanitarian assistance, and working with all the parties involved to ensure that there's a de-escalation in place.
Your office at the UN is responsible for coordinating what you continue to call the Middle East peace process. Where does that process stand now?
Currently, it is not proceeding, which I think is very obvious by what your viewers have seen and what we're describing here with rockets flying everywhere. And that's, again, why we need this escalation to stop so we can get people back to the table. We're briefing the Security Council member states who obviously have a lot of influence on where this is going. So as it stands now, that's what we're doing. We're working with all those who can influence the situation and bring this violence to a stop.
What message do you have to the parties in this conflagration?
Well, again, obviously, stop the fighting. It's civilians who are suffering. As I said, no access to water, sanitation, electricity, healthcare is already suffering because of the COVID pandemic. So that's the first thing. There obviously needs to be a de-escalation. The second thing is we need humanitarian access into and out of Gaza. Our staff needs to be able to get in and out, and we need to be able to bring goods in. And of course, stop the unilateral actions that are taking place. Many of those have already been described by a number of the member states before the Security Council and in other media briefings. Those include things like evictions in East Jerusalem, increasing settlement expansion, settler violence, demolitions of Palestinian property in both East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and the inability of Palestinians to be able to build on their own land in East Jerusalem and in parts of the West Bank as well. Those actions do not serve a peace process at all, and they need to stop, as do, of course, rockets from Gaza and other violence throughout the Palestinian territory. And now, as I said before, we're seeing in Israel.
Okay. Ms. Hastings, thank you very much for your time today. That was Lynn Hastings, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process at the UN.
Thank you, Terry.